Morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Sanitarian Advisory Committee meeting to order. It is Monday, February 3rd, 2020, and it is 9:30 in the morning, so we are ready to roll. So call to roll call. Steve Kotsatos.
Present.
Lisa Pomeroy.
Here.
Victor Morales.
Present.
Aaron Dunn.
Here.
And Ray Knight is going to be absent today, so we do have a quorum, so we can proceed. At this point, before we get into the actual remainder of the agenda, one of our committee members passed away last fall, Ray Knight, and since this is the first time we've been together since then, I would ask we take a moment of silence
Chair?
in his memory.
Mr. Dingman? Terry Riggs.
What did I say?
Ray Knight.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ray's still with us.
He's still here.
Sorry, Terry Riggs. So if we could take a moment of silence, please. Thank you. We'll proceed to item C on the agenda. And Doug, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Dingman. Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel for the department. I just want to say welcome back to all the members, and particularly to our new members, Ms. Dunn and Mr. Morales. We do an advisory committee training every year, and sometimes more frequently when the law changes. And so today we will be running through some major areas of law that you need to be familiar with, and that's the Open Meetings Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the Public Information Act. Today we'll spend the majority of our time, I believe, on the Open Meetings Act and touch on the others. And before we get started, just to give you some idea about the purpose of the Open Meetings Act. The Act requires meetings, such as today's, to be open to the public and to be preceded by public notice of the time, place, and subject matter of the meeting. We are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act today. We've posted the agenda. This meeting is open to the public. So we're doing well. We're starting on a high note. And the provisions of the Act are mandatory and are to be liberally construed in favor of open government or an open meeting if there's any ambiguity or if there's any question. We'll need to talk about just a few key terms before we can get into the substance. First of all, it's important to know that a quorum is a vital concept to this discussion, and that is simply a majority of the members of your board. And this board has 9 spots. We have a quorum here today in 5 members. It's important to know that a quorum has to be present in order for the body to take official action. Let's say 4 members had shown up today. We could certainly have discussions, and we could engage in this meeting, but the body couldn't make any rulings or vote on any topics. Another key concept is deliberation. Deliberation is simply a verbal or written exchange involving a governmental body that can either be amongst yourselves or if, for example, a public commenter shows up, your interaction with that member of the public could also constitute deliberation. One of the key takeaways from today's presentation is the idea you should have a clear idea of what a meeting is and where it can occur. A meeting can happen anywhere. A meeting occurs anytime a quorum of the members of your board gets together and engages in discussion about board business. So that can happen here, that can happen in the break room, can even happen in a Facebook post. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the how it can get a little bit difficult to conduct an open meeting or to avoid violating the law in social media space. But it's this is kind of the important one that I'll keep harping on. You'll want to be aware of any time a quorum of your members meets in any setting. Another key term is notice. The Act simply requires advance written notice of the date, time, place, and subject of the meeting. TDLR provides this in the form of an agenda, which we've provided to you and we've provided to the members of the public by filing the notice on our website and with the Texas Secretary of State. Going back to the concept that a meeting can happen anywhere a quorum of members is present, you're probably thinking, oh no, well, what if I meet with members of the board in another setting? that's not here. How do I navigate that? Well, let's say you're at a social function, you're at Mr. Dingman's Super Bowl party, you're at a convention or a workshop, and you have a quorum of members. How do you navigate that? You're free to engage in conversation that is incidental to the event. The thing you'll just want to be careful about when you notice a quorum of members, you don't want to talk about board business. You can say, I have an idea for something we might want to talk about at the next meeting, at which point someone should raise their hand and say, let's talk about it at the next meeting then. Just want to be very wary of that because you don't want to violate the act. And so really, one of the biggest takeaways is just you need to be aware of any situation outside of this room, outside of a properly noticed meeting, where you have a member, you have a quorum of members present. And one of the other concepts that we'll talk about in just a moment is you want to avoid creating a walking quorum as well. And that happens simply when a small number of board members engages in a discussion and then through some mechanism transmits that discussion to other members. So at least, I guess, up to 5 members for this board. We'll just give a little example. On a 5-member board, you've got 2 members who exchange phone calls and emails expressing their thoughts on an upcoming rule change. Perfectly fine. 2 members talking amongst themselves, talking between themselves is not a problem at all. But one of the board members then forwards those materials to another member. So in my example here, we have a 5-member advisory board. So once the second member forwards that exchange to the third member, you have a quorum violation. So you've had a meeting occur without notice, without an agenda, and that's highly problematic, and there could be criminal penalties engaged with that. And we'll just give a little example about how this can get kind of sticky in the social media space. We said earlier that a meeting can happen anywhere. It can even happen in a Facebook post. Let's say the chair posts an article about an interesting topic, and he happens to be friends with all of you on Facebook, and everyone says their piece and a little comment under that. All of a sudden, you have an open meetings violation because you have 5 members engaging in that conversation. Well, Facebook is pretty easy because just the way it's laid out, someone posts an article, people comment under it. And so you can actually see, you can count the number of people who have commented already, and if you'd be the 5th, you know not to say anything, just to read it and move on. But Twitter and other kind of burgeoning platforms are a little bit confusing because they don't work quite like Facebook. You don't see. So let's just talk about Twitter. I'm not terribly conversant in Twitter, so if I make a mistake, I would hope to be corrected. But in our example, we have Chairman Doe, who tweets without any further comment, just tweets out a link to an online news article about a big issue facing the electrical industry. Board member Smith sees that tweet and then retweets it. He shares it. And along with that, he makes a comment saying how vital it is that the board take up consideration of this important matter. So right now we have a chair and posting a comment, or posting a link, and another person sharing that link. Let's just presume a 9-member board here. So then board member Jones is our 3rd member to comment. He comments on Smith's post, and he says, we really need to look at Rule 101. Well, now we potentially have 3 people involved in this discussion. Board member Williams then comments on Smith's post with a comment, I agree, let's get this done. And then board member Johnson, in order to confuse us, doesn't make a comment, but simply gives Smith's post a thumbs up, which is a form of communication under the Act. So it's very possible that Chairman Doe had no idea that anyone was going to share or retweet his comment or his article. But then again, he might be fully aware and might intend for that to be the case. So all I would ask is that if you see a social media post on Twitter or Facebook, just be careful. See if there could possibly be, just do some basic research, click on a few shares and see who's involved. You just want to make sure that you're not in violation of the Act because, like I said, there are criminal penalties and nobody wants that. And so here are some good best practices to avoid dealing with any of these issues. To avoid a walking quorum, don't meet in small groups, such as work groups, and then transmit the content of those discussions to the fuller board, unless you're in a meeting like today's. And I mention that because we are going to appoint a work group today, which could have 3 or 4 members. So we ask people who meet in that setting to keep the discussions private, and then make a report to a full meeting next time we meet. And that way we don't have a walking quorum issue. And also some other practices to avoid. Don't create posts on social media if you believe that a quorum of members of the board is going to is going to engage in that discussion. Some guidelines about agendas and open sessions. The board is limited to discussing specific items on the agenda. Sometimes this gets tricky when you have a member of the public who comes to comment and may have questions or a really interesting topic he or she wants to discuss with the board. You are limited because that item is not specifically on the agenda. What you'll want to do in that case is thank the commenter for his or her concerns, and someone can suggest to put that topic on the meeting, on the agenda for the next meeting, and then we can have a free and full and well-researched discussion. Some good practices to avoid violating the act on the basis of insufficient notice. Like I said, limit your discussions to the specific agenda items on your agenda that's filed with the Secretary of State. And we are here to kind of police part of this. If a discussion starts and it seems like it's in line with the agenda, but then someone raises a question and the discussion kind of wanders off, Ms. Winston or I will probably pipe up and say, let's stop this discussion where it is now. Let's suggest that this be covered on a future agenda. And also one thing that we ask you to do, and there's even an agenda item for this at the end, if you have an idea for a topic for a future agenda, send that to us in advance if you can via email. But you're certainly allowed to mention that at the meeting. As I mentioned, there are some criminal penalties and some civil. Any interested person that includes the media can petition the courts to stop an action taken in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So if a board were to meet in the break room and take a vote on an issue, that vote could be invalidated in court because it violates the act, assuming that there was not an agenda posted that the meeting would be held in the break room, of course. Some penalties for Open Meetings Act violations. If you are a member who knowingly evades the act or intentionally closes a meeting, there are some penalties of confinement in county jail for 1 to 6 months and a fine of $100 to $500 or both. You don't want that. So we'll move on to the second major topic, which is the Administrative Procedure Act. That is simply a chapter of the Texas Government Code that tells agencies how to run their rulemaking, how to run their enforcement processes. Mostly today we'll be talking about rulemaking. I think it's a good time to talk about rulemaking because we're at the very beginning of a rulemaking process. Today I'll ask the chair to appoint a work group for the education and examination rules. We'll be looking at a couple of existing Sanitarian's rules and having a work group meeting and maybe suggesting some modifications to those rules. The rules, as you know, have the force of law. We have a statute, and then we have TDLR's rules, which interpret the statute and really tell licensees and the public how to do the practical things, how to apply for a registration, what the fees are, things like that, what courses are acceptable for continuing education, and so on. A rule is simply a statement that implements, interprets, or prescribes law or policy, and it's a statement of general applicability. Our organizational chart, for example, at TDLR is not a rule, but I'm sure you're intimately familiar with the Sanitarian's rules, so you know what these are. What you may not be as familiar with are the various sources for rulemaking. As you know, every couple of years the legislature meets, and sometimes they make changes to your program statute, sometimes they don't. In years where those changes are made, we'll need to engage in rulemaking to align our rules with the changed statutes. Your advisory board work groups may also come up with suggested changes, some amendments to rules. And sometimes maybe we'll be having a meeting about a topic and the advisory board may suggest engaging in rulemaking. Well, now that we've talked about this topic, I'm really seeing a need to address Rule 119.23. Okay, well, we'll put that on a future agenda and talk about it. Sometimes TDLR staff will notice a deficiency or kind of a constant question revolving around a certain rule and may suggest changes to that. Every 4 years, we are required to go through, the agency is required to review the rules to see if they are still needed. And then there's another thing called a rule petition, where a member of the public can simply suggest or petition the agency to engage in rulemaking. So if you're a person who's a Texas resident, a business entity in Texas, a governmental subdivision, or a public or private organization, there is a procedure in TDLR's Chapter 60 of the Title 16 of the Texas Administrative Code that tells you here is what you have to do. If you would like TDLR to adopt a rule, please put it in the following format and email it to a certain address, and we will have a hearing on it and consider rulemaking. Just to give you a little bit, you'll see this play out later in the year. Just want to show you what the rulemaking process looks like at TDLR. Just in advance, you'll see a couple of blue boxes. That's where the advisory board comes into play. So at the very beginning, let me see if I can get this laser. Yeah, there we go. So at the very beginning, we'll have the idea for a rule, which will usually an assistant general counsel will draft a rule, which we will then send to the advisory board for consideration. So let's say that we have some recommended changes that may come out of our future rulemaking, looking at Rules 119, 23, and 27. The first time, I will draft that rule, and I'll work with other staff, and they'll finally get approved through our process. And I'll bring it to the board and say, these are the rules that we have come up with. This is the rationale. We'll have the work group who worked on those rules discuss the changes. And then we'll ask you for approval to publish the rules. And that simply means we publish the rules in a publication called the Texas Register, which is maintained by the Texas Secretary of State, and that opens a 30-day period for the public to comment on those rules. Once those 30 days have passed, the Office of General Counsel will gather those comments, and we will bring them back to the advisory board a second time. We'll say, here are the rules you approved to be published, here are the comments we've received, and we will ask you for your guidance on how to proceed. If you believe that the comments really have highlighted a weakness in the draft rule or really have identified something that needs to be changed, we can certainly make those changes and go back to the first step. If not, if the comments are not persuasive and you'd like to adopt the rules without changes, you'll just make that recommendation. And then ultimately, our commission, the Texas Commission of Licensing and Regulation, will approve those rules for adoption. So this is a lengthy process, and intentionally so because the public's involvement is really critical in this process. Another process that you're not going to see terribly often. It only happens every 4 years. Every 4 years, every program here in the agency, its rules have to be reviewed to see if they're still relevant, if they're still necessary. And there are some notices that we need to publish. Similarly, we will bring those rules to you and ask for your input if certain rules may not be necessary or if they need to be changed. Not going to see that very often. Lastly, we'll move on to the Public Information Act. You've heard this referred to as the Open Records Act. It simply provides a mechanism for members of the public to have access to materials produced by government bodies, and you are a government body. So one of the interesting things is the Act makes all documents and records, subject to some exceptions, all those records relating to official business open to the public. And it doesn't matter where those documents are stored. So whether you are conducting board business on a personal device, whether you're conducting it on a TDLR cell phone or TDLR iPad, any texts or emails that you send relating to your position as an advisory committee member are subject to disclosure under the Public Information Act. So the thing to take away from this is if you ever receive an email or a text from a member of the public that appears to be asking for some sort of information, dear member, I would like a copy of all of your emails regarding subject X. Please immediately forward it to the Office of General Counsel here at TDLR. The law gives us 10 days to respond to one of these requests, and so the deadlines are really tight. If you have a question about some communication that you get, if you're wondering, is this an open records request, forward it to us and ask us, give us a call, and we'll give you guidance on that. It's just very important that we do this in a timely manner, but do be certain that if there's any, for some reason, if you are ill and are going to miss a meeting, something that discloses a medical condition or private information is likely to be protected from disclosure, but we still have to know when you receive a request. Any questions? All right, that will do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. All right, we'll move on to item E on the agenda, approval of minutes of our May 8th, 2018 meeting. At this point, you all have copies of that in your packets. Does anyone have any questions, or is there any discussion on the minutes? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. This is Stephen Katsatos. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, a motion by Stephen to approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Lisa Pomeroy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda, item F, public comment. We have an opportunity for the public to make comments at this meeting. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to make a public comment? Okay. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item G, staff reports, licensing division.
Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning.
Members. I'm Lisa Hodak, the licensing manager. I have to start out by apologizing first because the report that was previously sent to you, I had left off the percentage of renewed online numbers. And so I placed that on the table for you before the meeting started, so you'll have that, and I apologize for not completing my report. The numbers are all accurate, and this is a standard format that I use, and it will show the last two fiscal years, and then I've included the first quarter for this year. And we have new registrations issued online, renewals, and then total population. And just as a reminder, the license period for the Sanitarian as well as Sanitarian and training is a 2-year license. So if it doesn't quite look right as far as the numbers adding up for the total population, that's why. The total population is a snapshot of the number of active licenses on the first day of the month. And so that includes the licenses issued and renewed, and it's the total activity performed during the fiscal year. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
So I guess my question is, just so for my clarity, the 437 online renewals is 437 of the 540, or?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
If there's anything that you want in the future on this report, I'll be happy to add it. Just let me know. Like I said, this is the standard format that we typically use. And also wanted to, just a brief update. I'm excited because I'm going to be having 2 new people on my team. We've interviewed over the last couple of weeks, and we're hoping to offer those positions this week. So we've got a lot of new hires going on in the agency, which I'm sure the other divisions will talk about as well. And that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anyone else have any questions? All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Customer Service Division.
Good morning, advisory board members. My name is Tuan Win. I'm the customer service manager for this program. Since the last time we met, just going through fiscal year 2019 data, most of our numbers still pretty average. We usually do see our peaks in the springtime for January, February, March, April, and May, and usually slows down a little bit, and then it peaks again for the next following year, as we have saw in the fiscal 2020 stats. For our personnel updates, since the last time we met, we have 2 new customer service managers. Their name is Dawn Robinson and Jacqueline Rush. We have also hired 2 new quality training and performance analysts who does a lot of our new hire and ongoing training in our data analytics. We also hired 2 additional team leads, and will be continuing to interview for our embedded service rep positions. That position works a lot more with the other divisions on follow-up requests and definitely on our process improvement plans. And then we are also continuing to hire for our customer service CSR positions that are usually handling phone calls. Other than that, I'll be happy to answer any additional questions you have.
I have one question.
Yes.
On the numbers for the emails and the calls, are those received and made? So if you emailed me and I emailed you back, that would be 2? Or-
Those are inbound emails only. So those are the amount of emails that we receive.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Kwong? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the Enforcement Division report, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Amanda Barrera. I'm one of the prosecutors in the Enforcement Division. I will be presenting the Enforcement Division staff report to you today. For personnel updates, Enforcement has been really busy hiring with TDLR growing so much. Specifically for the prosecutors, we've hired Natalie Olvera and Rusa Nizami, who are attorneys who will be handling inspection cases and unlicensed activity. So I do want to discuss the statistics for fiscal year 2018, 2019, and what we have in 2020. But before I jump into those statistics, I just kind of want to give you a little brief overview of how we get to those statistics with cases and enforcement. So specifically in the Sanitarian program, we receive complaints, and that's how the cases stem from, whether they're from the general public, within the agency, or other agencies. The Enforcement Division is divided into 3 sections. That's intake, investigation, and the prosecution. So the case starts in intake when they receive that complaint. The intake determines whether we have jurisdiction and whether we have enough information to proceed. If so, they then forward that to the investigators, who then investigate that. They'll review documents, obtain photos, speak to any experts if need be, and obtain any information that they can. Once they have enough evidence to support their case, they will then forward it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor then will review all the evidence, and they can either resolve it informally through a warning letter or through a closing letter. And that can depend on whether there was enough evidence to support the case, or maybe someone's come into compliance, and so there's different factors that the prosecutor takes into account there. Alternatively, they can go the formal route, which is a notice of alleged violation that imposes an administrative penalty based off the penalty matrix for each program, which Mr. Reyes will speak to you about in Agenda Item H today for your penalty matrix for this program. Once a notice of alleged violation is sent out, it can be resolved in one of 3 ways. Either there could be a default order, which means that the respondent has received notice but has not responded. There could be an agreed order, meaning that the parties have now come to an agreement and have settled the case. Or the respondent can request a hearing at the State Office of Administrative Hearings. There, an administrative law judge will review the case and issue what's called a proposal for decision. That then goes in front of TDLR's commission, and they make the final decision on how the case is resolved. So another way that enforcement gets cases is through inspections. There are certain programs like cosmetology and barbering that have periodic inspections. Should an inspector see something on site, they forward it to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor can resolve it the same way as the complaints. Lastly, the Enforcement Division also gets cases through criminal history, which I believe last meeting you spoke with Mr. Ken Sharp about the criminal conviction guidelines for your program. So when an applicant is applying, they're subject to a criminal background check. Should any of the criminal background check come back and say that they have a conviction or deferred adjudication that brings rise, comparing that to the criminal conviction guidelines, it's forwarded to a prosecutor who will then determine whether that license should be issued or not. So I believe because sanitarians have a similar goal to TDLR to protect the health and safety of the public, there's not many cases in this program. So moving to those statistics, 4 cases were open in the fiscal year of 2018, which began on September 1st, 2017. 2 cases were resolved without any final orders being issued, nor any penalties being assessed. 1 case was open in fiscal year 2019, which began on September 1st, 2018. 2 cases were resolved without any final orders being issued, nor any penalties being assessed. For fiscal year 2020, on September 1st, 2019 through November, there were 0 cases opened, with 0 having any final orders or any penalties assessed. So I know I just threw a lot at you. Are there any questions?
So that means there's still one open case.
I believe there is, and as of today, I believe there are 2 open cases. One that is with a prosecutor and one that is still in intake.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, Regulatory Program Management Division update.
Good morning. My name is Rick Garza. I'm a new employee for the Sanitarian program, but I also do code enforcement officers, and I also do mold assessors and remediators. I started back in May of last year, and in October, the Sanitarian program was given to me. I have over 28 years of state service, 17 years with the Department of Agriculture as a coordinator for programs. I've also was a game warden for 9 years. So I bring a lot of government background to this position. My main goal is outreach, along with helping customer service and licensing for expertise. I've been riding along with code enforcement officers and Sanitarian to get more familiar with the programs. As you see, I've ridden with Misty Gee out of Fort Bend County, also Ben Mungia, code enforcement for Fort Bend County, Ray Cruz with the City of Austin. Also have Thursday, I'm going to be heading to the Sanitarian program for Austin. I'll be riding with them on Thursday. And so I am trying to learn as much as I can about these programs in order to do my best for the programs. Upcoming ride-alongs, I'll be riding along with Lubbock. I have not made that date yet, but it will be in the next couple of months. Also with Bryan and College Station, I'll be riding with them in the next month. And again, this Thursday with Austin. My public outreach was my first annual Texas Environmental Health Association meeting in Austin. I introduced myself. I was very, I enjoyed being at that meeting and meeting the diversity that is in this state, and enjoyed that. I also attended and presented legislative updates at the South Texas Environmental Health Association meeting. Other than that, that's about it. Do you have any questions for me?
I think your ride-alongs with the environmental health staff are really a great idea. You can read all the books and listen to all the videos and everything else that you want, but being in the field and seeing what goes on in the real world is something that you can't get from any other source, and I applaud you for doing that. If you get a chance, come on up to the North Texas area. We can
I plan
take
on
you
it.
around and show you some good things.
I think the diversity of these programs are very, very, they're interesting to be a part of and to learn from the experts out in the field. That's my goal. That way I can then turn around and use that knowledge and be a good program specialist for the Sanitarian program.
Thank you. Any other questions for Rick?
Not necessarily a question, but similarly, El Paso is also, given how far out to the west it is, it's probably a bit different than a lot of the counties you're likely to see.
I'll get your card before I leave, before the end of the meeting.
All right.
All right,
Thank you,
thank
Rick. Okay, I bet the people in Education and Examination Division thought I had spaced them out, but I didn't. I was just pulling a little trick on you there, so please.
Good morning. I'm Fanny Pringle with the Education Examination Division. To start off, we have some recent personnel updates. As TDR has grown, E&E has restructured our organization to better accommodate our increasing workloads and to more effectively address the education and examination needs of our regulated communities. To this end, E&E has created 2 sections and hired 2 managers to lead them. Michael Ford Strong is the new manager of the Outreach, Audits, and Policy section, and Angie Schmidt is the manager of the new Training and Accreditation section. OAP, Outreach, Audits, and Policy, their focus is going to be conducting workshops, visiting schools, handling the publication needs of our division, as well as developing exams and policies. The Training and Accreditation section will be accrediting schools, approving training providers, as well as approving training and continuing education courses. I believe you have our statistical information for the monthly exam statistics. We also have our fiscal year statistics posted on the Sanitarian exam webpage as well. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
When did the new test begin?
Let's see. It's been, oh my goodness, I'd have to look that up. It's been in place, I think, roughly a year.
As I understand it, you're in the process of creating some new questions right now or revising that?
We've done our first transition from, we've had one exam review committee that's created the existing exam, which was updating the DSHS exam and making it ours for our agency. And then this coming in March, we will be having March 3rd and 4th, we'll be having another meeting, and it will be reviewing the questions that we just recently, this last ERC, created to see if they're, to review the overperforming and underachieving exam questions. And those are, the overperforming questions are questions where, you know, like 95% of everybody's getting them right. Or in the underachieving, underperforming questions are those that, you know, like nobody's getting correctly. And so we take a second look at them to make sure that the questions have all the information needed to answer the question correctly, that we don't have, there's not more than one correct answer, that there's no errors, that if we look at the statistics on if everybody's getting this wrong, what are they across the board randomly guessing? Or are they, everyone's going to answer number 2 when the correct answer is number 3? Why are they going to 2? And we kind of do that kind of analysis. And sometimes, like I said, there may be a problem with the question. Other times, the question's perfectly fine, and the subject matter experts say, no, this is, we're glad that everybody's getting it right. That means that we have some competency out there. If everybody's getting it wrong, but the question's good, then we're glad that we're keeping these people out of the licensee pool. And then, but then sometimes, you know, we just decide, you know, maybe this question's just too easy, or this question's too hard, and it's not appropriate for an entry-level licensee. And we make those kinds of decisions. In addition to that, we will be creating new questions. And whenever we create new questions, we always rate the question on the difficulty, so that when a licensee or the examinee, takes an exam, everybody is answering the same number of questions from each topic, but they're also getting the same number of difficult questions and easy questions. And so we rate those questions, and then when they actually take the exam and we get actual numbers of who's getting questions right or wrong, then we update the mix that way to make sure that everybody's getting equally fair exams, but but individual exams, so no 2 people are taking the same exam.
Any additional questions?
Actually, have you looked at the trend as far as like the pass-fail on your statistics? Because it looks like it has kind of been showing a little bit of a downward trend.
I did, well, if you notice that for each month, the number of actual testers is fairly small. Like September is 14, October 8, November 6. Generally, when we do statistics, it's not really a valid statistics until you get about 50 people testing. And so when you look at the fiscal year at the very far right-hand column of the page, in fiscal year 2018, the pass rate was 61.5, and then last year it was 62.5. For that's statistically, that's not very significant. We seem to be holding it the same. However, I think maybe what caught your eye and caught my eye as well is that in December, the pass rate went down to 28%, and that did, raise a flag. And so I checked to see what January's numbers are, and January's numbers weren't available at time of publication, but January's numbers are back to 67%. And there were, I think, 6 or 7 testers. So again, as we complete the fiscal year, I'd be more, I think that will give us a more accurate number of where the trends are. And month to month, where the numbers are so small, it's enough information that, we look into it to see if there's any kind of weird thing going on. But I just think that was just.
No, with
this
January, it looks like people just had a bad month. So.
Yeah, it could be the holidays, people have other things going on, it's hard to say.
Yeah, but you looked into it, that sounds good.
Okay.
Is there a target pass rate percentage that you're shooting for?
No, there is never a target for pass rate. The target is the mission of the exam is a measuring device to weed out who's competent and who's not. And if 95% of the people pass, then we say that's fantastic. We're increasing our numbers. If 95% fail, we say great. We save Texas from a lot of unsafe people. So, but the way the exam is designed, our subject matter experts, we tell them that we want candidates to be safe and competent, and the benchmark is what do they need to know to be safe? What do they need to know to be competent? And when we look at questions, if we always remind the candidates as they're creating questions, okay, if somebody is right at a 69, is this next question the one that you want to use to determine that they get a license or not get a license? Because each question is potentially that one that's going to put them over, and so we want to make sure that it's a good question that will separate competency from non-competency.
Great. Any additional questions? All right. Thank you very much, Fanny.
You're very welcome.
Okay, moving right along to the executive office update.
Mary Winston, TLR, giving the executive report. First, I want to say E&E always amazes me at how they do the testing and how they get the questions and how they have the actual professionals as part of the team. And it's not an exact science, but it's a science. And they work really hard to make sure we have competent folks in Texas. So thank you, Fanny. I just always love listening to that. Personnel updates. Since we last met, we did have a retirement in our executive office. Ms. Carla James was the deputy executive director, and she retired in end of November, 1st December. When Carla left, we knew that we needed 2 people to replace one Carla. So, and we've also expanded a bit, and we hired, along with Mike Harris-Mendez, who is our current Deputy Executive Director, 2 more. We have Mr. David Gonzalez, the former Director of RPM, is now a Deputy Executive Director, and Ms. Christina Kaiser, formerly the Director of Enforcement, has now been promoted to Deputy Executive Director. They've both been at the agency for a number of years and bring with them a wealth of knowledge to really enhance those positions. Sunset Review update. The Sunset Advisory Commission is a legislative body who is tasked with assessing the state agencies. There are over 130 Texas state agencies. They give a, thumbs up, thumbs down, what we need to do better, what we can do, what we are doing well, and how we can make the agency better. They even decide whether an agency should even exist or not. Sunset staff has been with us since the fall, we have done, as an agency, a self-assessment. In the fall, staff participated in about 50 meetings with Sunset staff, just different sections of the staff. And from January on, it says we have 13 meetings scheduled, but I know that we have more than that scheduled coming up. They attended several advisory board meetings. They've had lots of questions and may reach out to some of you. They're in the confidential data gathering stage, and after the publication of their report, there will be a public hearing to go over the report, their findings. We're looking at possibly a July date for that. That is open to the public, and they'll present their recommendations. Their staff will speak, answer questions, and this is an opportunity for the public to provide public comment, just as they do here. About a month after that, they will take their recommendations to the commission for the report to let us know how we're doing. It is a long and arduous process, and they are doing some really hard work, some really deep diving. And we welcome it because it can only make us better. Whatever questions they ask, we want them truthfully answered because we want to do the best for the state of Texas. Strategic planning process. Here's our own little review. Our legislative sessions occur every odd year. So during the even years, TDLR hits the road. We go to several areas of the state. We have someone working on that now. He's not looking up, but who is working on which staff is going to go to which area, and we invite all of our licensees, the public, to come out and to give us information on what we do best. We ask these questions: what could we do better? If you were king or queen for a day, what would you have us do? And then we ask questions pertaining to what sort of technology or innovation is coming up in the next 5 years that's going to affect your program, because those things are very determinative. No matter how well we do something, it's going to affect how things run. So pretty soon we'll be coming out with that in the next month or so, and we'll be hitting several Texas cities, and we try to go north, south, panhandle, everywhere. I think I've been to Lubbock and El Paso and different places. So we really do try to hit all points that are Texas and not just the major cities that people think of: Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. Communication outreach statistics. This is sort of an informal look, but it's a snapshot. I tell everyone we're the government and we collect tons of information because it helps us be better, helps us know what we're doing well, or at least what is reaching the public. Over the past 6 months, the Sanitarian's website has had over 16,000 views, an average of 88 per day. 55% of the visitors access the site from a desktop computer, 40% from a smartphone, and 5% from a tablet. And the top reasons for visiting the site are applying for a new sanitarian registration, exam information, administrative rules, apply for a new sanitarian in training registration, and forms. Those are the top 5 reasons for visiting the sites. And lastly, I want to do a virtual introduction of our anti-trafficking unit. During the last session, the legislature saw fit, and we appreciate them doing so, for funding this actual anti-trafficking unit. The previous session, we had before that, we've been given the massage therapy program to regulate. Came from DSHS, who has a plethora of other issues, and we now have coronavirus. So that's something that State Health Services is going to have to deal with. And based on the legislative process at that time, they moved massage therapy to TDLR as one of our programs. When we got that program, we figured out that an inspection component would be needed, as we do with several of our programs. And during that process, we also figured out that there were some possible aspects happening within massage therapy that needed a closer look, and that would involve human trafficking. We had one staff member at the time who we could afford to pay, because we didn't have a budgeted amount for this person at the time, who kind of handled the whole state of Texas, just triaging, gathering all information, educating, and doing inspections when they could, along with our enforcement division that is complaint-based, and our inspections, our field inspections division, that is a periodic inspection. So during those two time periods, there's a gap. This last session, we were given monies to actually staff, and we have 8 people, including the one person who was doing this all alone, who are currently being trained with our field inspection staff and our enforcement staff, and over our program of massage. And, you know, we found actually labor trafficking in other areas that we regulate. So this is much needed. We currently they started January 2nd. We have on the team Chuck Winkler, Ray Carswell, Jennifer Ignacio, Alex Ortiz, Jordan Strain, Gloria Newton, and Brian Cottle. They joined Miss Jennifer Harless, who for almost 2 years before that had been trying to tackle this as well as she could during that time. So they're training and getting up to date, and once we actually get them here and done with training, we'll try to introduce the staff to everyone. And that is the end of my report. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mary. Okay, Mr. Reyes is going to talk to us about the penalty matrix for the RS program.
Yes, sir. Good morning. My name is Robert Reyes, prosecutor with the Enforcement Division. I drafted the penalty matrix with the assistance of John Medlock, senior prosecutor, Ms. Barrera, who has previously spoken to you all today, as well as the Enforcement Division management analysts, Chris Russi and Ms. Griselda Perez, who's working on a little visual here for you. After offering the initial draft to the work group committee, which consisted of Mr. Dingman and Ms. Pomeroy, on September 9th, 2019, I offered the penalty matrix for the Sanitarian program to the committee at whole for y'all's review and approval. Some general information about the penalty matrix. It puts the industry and public on notice for potential violations in the program. It's also guidance for us as prosecutors. When we have a penalty matrix, we're able to look at the violation and also have a clear idea of the penalty that we should request in our notice of alleged violation when pursuing a formal enforcement action against a violator. It does not do several things, and these are important items. It does not create law. What we've done is we've put into plain speak the code sections as well as rules that are found in the occupations code and the administrative rules. It also does not obligate the department to impose a penalty if a violation is found. It only comes into play if we as prosecutors, using our discretion, feel that a formal action is necessary to get people into compliance or have a penalty which they should pay, or a license sanction if that's the case. It is not binding on the commission when making the final decision in a contested case. So once again, just a lot of notice for the public and for the licensees as far as what can be a violation in the program. The penalty matrix that is before you today uses a single range of penalties and sanctions for each class of violation. In other words, it eliminates separate ranges for first, second, and third violations, which had previously been the division standard format. So now, if it's the respondent's first, second, or third violation, the penalty and/or sanction must fall within that single range. However, with that single range, we have an expanded range between the minimum amount of a penalty and the maximum amount of a penalty. That's a good thing because it allows us to use our discretion and read the facts and take the totality of the facts into consideration when assigning a penalty, administrative penalty value to it. In programs where the bulk of our disciplinary cases arise from consumer complaints, we've learned that from one case to the next, the same violation can vary widely in terms of consumer harm or the potential harm that is created. So therefore, greater range, greater ability to actually pinpoint an accurate amount for the penalty to respond to the actions committed. This similar approach also eliminates the progressive increase in penalties from one case to the next that enforcement is currently locked into some programs where the first, second, and third violation are set out separately. Our experiences have shown that respondents do not always commit progressively serious violations. The single ranges for each class of violation is also based on our experience with working with penalty matrices in our legacy programs. The separate ranges for first, second, and third violations have been stumbling blocks at times when dealing with contested matters. People have varying opinions on when those ranges should apply. We have seen confusion and conflict that consumes time unnecessarily and distracts the parties from trying to find a solution, and judges in the administrative law court from hearing the merits of the case. We're hoping that with a similar approach of a single range, we can eliminate that confusion. And then lastly, we have our simplified approach is consistent with the agency goal of committing to a streamlined procedural steps to ensure prompt investigation and the resolution of complaints. As I stated in the introduction, Mr. Medlock, Mr. Russi, Ms. Bettis, and I, as well as Ms. Barrera, conferred with the enforcement group on creating this new matrix. We got it drafted, submitted it to the work group, and on September 9th, 2019, we met by teleconference to hash out any confusion or to get everything clarified in terms of the matrix. Emails were exchanged after the review, and one edit was made as a result of the feedback that was offered during the teleconference. That change was a general drafting of the item in Class A for 119.70B. We had originally itemized the information under the public notice violations subheading. We just grouped them in the final draft that is before you today. Doesn't lose any of its power, just able to make it a little bit more clear. In conclusion, the division requests that you vote today to approve this revised penalty matrix that's before you and have it approved so that it can be offered to the commission for inclusion in the agency's overall enforcement plan. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions for Mr. Reyes? All right, then I will entertain a motion on this matter.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Katsadas
Second.
and second by Aaron Dunn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, motion carries.
Thank you for your
Robert.
time.
All right, moving on to item I on the agenda, appointment of education work groups to review changes, recommend any changes to section 119.23 and 119.27, both dealing with education and continuing education requirements in the Sanitarian rule. There have been, I won't say a lot, but there have been several questions regarding what types of courses that people can take are appropriate for CEUs, what classes they can take, and so we really both these rules were brought over from TD, Texas Department of State Health Services, and they really need to be reviewed and taken care of and updated and made in better, more easily understood language. So I would like to convene a work group to handle both of these section revisions and recommendations, and 'cause this is, in my opinion, a really important part of what we do. is all these continuing education requirements. It keeps the sanitarians at the top of their game. So I'm looking for at least 3 individuals who would like to serve on this committee.
I would like to volunteer.
Okay, Lisa, Aaron,
Excuse me, Mr. Dingman?
yes.
I'd like to remind you, we do have, from a previous meeting, we have Mr. Katsados and Mr. Knight are already part of that. So you may just want to, Mr. Katsados, I don't know if you have a desire to be on this, but, and so we'll just need to figure out. You're certainly welcome to add and remove as you see fit. I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Steve, are you still interested?
Yes.
Okay. And Ray was also, you said, Doug?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But your discretion.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so, I don't want to put everybody on this work group, so I'll leave it with those 4, Lisa, Aaron, Steve, and Ray at the present time, and we'll just put it in the very capable hands of TDLR staff to convene whatever teleconferences and meetings are necessary to achieve the goals that we need to have achieved. While we're talking about work groups, we also have 3 additional work groups that are existing work groups. One is the enforcement one. The other one is a licensing work group. Both of these groups have a spot on them if someone would like to take it. Our former committee member, Sean May, is no longer actually in Texas. And so if someone would like to work on those work groups, I would certainly be open to adding them to the names, to the rosters. You know,
I'd be happy to join.
take your preference.
I'm not sure what either one's working on.
Well, the enforcement work group is the one that Robert just presented on, so it's pretty much wrapping up at this point. The licensing work group, Doug, can you help me?
Yes, happy to help, Mr. Dingman. Right now, moving forward, the education and examination work group will be working on some rulemaking potentially. I'm not aware of anything that's pending in the enforcement or licensing work groups, but certainly as topics come along, recommendations from staff come along, we could convene those groups to begin rulemaking in those areas as well.
I guess licensing sounds fine.
Okay. Okay. And then the education and examination work group. Okay, we get that pretty much taken care of.
And Mr. Dingman, I don't see a need, unless you do, to appoint anyone to the standard of care work group. I don't see that.
No.
Those changes happening for at least a little while till after the session, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we got the work groups basically filled out now. Next item on the agenda is J. Does anyone have any recommendations for agenda items for the next meeting?
Mr. Dingman, Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. I would just recommend that we add work group reports and potentially draft rules depending on the progress that the group makes. We might just make a report. We might have some draft, but we will see. And I don't mean to move ahead to the next agenda item, but I'm anticipating meeting in about 6 months. And we will know well in advance whether we're going to have draft rules or just kind of a conceptual work group report.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you, Doug. Anyone else have any items for next meeting's agenda? Okay, before we talk about agenda item K, I would like to just kind of put it out there, especially for the people that may be viewing us online or whatever. We have 3 open positions on this committee, and I have strong feelings that we need to get those 3 positions filled. And so I'm asking the committee members, those people out there in television land, to consider people that you might know that would be a good fit for this committee and encourage them to participate. If anyone has any questions, anyone on the committee would be happy to talk with them, and TDLR staff would be happy to talk with you. So please let's see if we can't get a full committee put together here.
Mr. Dingman, I wanted to add that one of those vacancies is for a consumer. So that's a public member, and
Yes.
they don't have to have a license. They just need to be a concerned citizen in Texas. One is for a registered sanitarian, and one is for a person involved in education in the field of public, consumer, or environmental health services.
Not necessarily an RS either.
Not necessarily at all.
All right. So, moving on to agenda item K, the next meeting date, time, and location. As Doug mentioned, we're probably looking about 6 months out. So,
Mary Winston, we can definitely poll the board closer to that time period. So a couple of months before that, but to kind of give a more definite date, we don't have to get a date today.
okay. All right, so plan on mid-year meeting for the next one. Is there any other, are there any other comments or items regarding date, time, and location for the committee meeting? All right, hearing none, comes to item L, adjourn. It is now 10:37 a.m. on the same day we started, February 3rd, 2020. And I now declare this meeting to be ended. Thank you all.